Welcome to my podcast. Today I'm going to be covering the constructions along the Rhine River. You'll find yourself now, if you're listening to this, during the excursion at point one, which is the crossing between the Veerweg and the Aan de Rijn road. What I'm going to do with this podcast is sort of just, I'll talk for a segment, and then you can travel to the next point along the excursion, and then I'll have like a little dialogue there. So right now at point one, assuming you're there, we've got the floodplains. You'll just be entering. This is sort of the. Keep in mind, this whole area is actually supposed to flood if the water level gets to a certain point. I'll leave you now to continue along to point three, which is the Bovense Just follow the road and enjoy the sights. Okay, welcome to point three. Down here, as part of the excursion, we're going to take some flow velocity measurements. The water flow velocity is a bit variable in the Rhine, so be patient and give it a couple tries. But hopefully you can get some good data and see what the groin is all about. You'll notice at the tip of the groins where the water's flowing out to sea is just the usual flow, but then inside of the groin fields you actually have like a reverse flow or stagnant water in some cases. This is because when the water hits the opposing groin, it actually sort of deflects and then it'll turn around in the groin field and it'll go the other way. This is quite useful if you're a sailor because it can be nice just to go into one of these groin fields where the flow velocity is quite low, and then you can sort of recollect yourself. Sailing can be quite intense if the wind's up and you're trying to go into the wind direction. So it's like a sort of a semi-calm place where you can, figure out your sails and get out of the way of Rhine arcs if those come through, the big, large construction vessels. So they do have other purposes, but the actual purpose of groins is to prevent erosion. And the way that they do that is because they prevent meandering. If you look down the river, you'll see that these groins are pretty much built everywhere along the Rhine, all throughout Holland, actually, not just here. But it's mainly in bends where they've built. If you'll see, if you walk further along, that straight parts of the river are just flat. They're still rocky in some spots, but also inner bends don't really have groins as often as outer bends because it's mainly outer bends that erode in rivers. You will still see them on some inner bends, but as a general rule, they're less common. And the way they do that is that you can sort of see in the channel there's like a main flow, and building groins actually increases the flow velocity in the main canal as well. And then when the water hits, the water will be flowing. If you're looking at the river, it should be flowing to the right because it'll be going towards the ocean, so west. You'll notice that when the water hits the groin, if you can picture it, it sort of hits the groin, the water will go left and right, and it'll make a circle around. And because it loses all its flow velocity, it'll then dump its sediment on the side of the riverbank. You can see it's more visible on satellite images if you're listening to this podcast from home. But if you're out in the field, you should be able to see it as well. You can see that there's like beaches, and you'll see that the sediment, the depth of sediment is a lot shallower in these groin fields than the actual groins themselves. I don't know, if you've ever been for a swim, you'll definitely notice that if you go far enough into the actual river, there's a steep drop, and that's where the groin stops having effect. So you have that steep transition. Normally it's from about, a groin field can be anywhere from about half a meter to a meter, the ones that I've been sampling along here. And then it'll just collapse into, the river depth. Or if you look at one side of the groin, you'll notice it's deeper than the other, and that's to do with the flow direction. At site 3, for example, if you're standing on the groin to the west, you'll notice that to the northeast, there's a boat dock there. That's because the water depth there is surpassing about 2 meters. And that's a common pattern in about most groins because the sediment island that's created is only in one corner, like one corner of the groin. And then when the water reaches the other end of the groin opposite to the flow direction, it'll go back out into the main channel and then it'll take sediment with it when it goes there. So that creates like a deeper part of the groin field. Anyway, I'll let you travel, and I'll see you again at the next point. Okay, so hopefully the measurement collection went well and was enlightening. If you're not doing the excursion, the two measurements at this point, one is where you use a floater to measure the flow velocity of the actual canal itself, like the main part of the river. And then the second part is where you use a floater to measure the flow velocity in the groin field. The only problem with this experiment, you might have encountered it if you're in the field doing this yourself, is that the flow velocity of the Rhine is usually very slow, especially in spring and summer. I mean, the undercurrent is quite high. I should say the surface water is quite slow, and it's affected by wind as well. On a windy day, most floaters you throw in will just get blown around, and you won't get an accurate reading. So I ran into this as well when I was trying to do my data, is that it's quite hard to actually obtain an accurate flow velocity measurement because the velocity of the river isn't that high. But what you can sometimes see, pardon me, is that inside of the groin field, the flow velocity is opposite to the flow velocity of the main channel. So in the main channel, the flow velocity is going to the west, it's going to the ocean, or southwest, if you're at site 3. And inside of the groin field, because it hits one of the groins, it gets deflected back. So the flow velocity inside of the actual field is moving the other way until it reaches the opposing groin, and then it gets deflected back, so to speak, into the actual main canal. Okay, I'd like to draw your attention now to the wooden pillar line you see in front of you if you're at site 4, I believe it is. Anyway, it's the groin field next to the Bovensterpolder. But this line of posts, you'll see it across some of the groins, but not a lot. It's partly to prevent erosion of the coast, and it's also to encourage a good ecological ecosystem there, a good high biodiversity of different plants and fish varieties. You'll notice as well, if you continue along, or if you've explored other groin fields, that the fields without these posts have significantly less aquatic life in them. There's another set of groins further west, and these ones don't have posts. And you'll notice two things. You'll notice that the water depth is much shallower. So your distance from your water surface to your actual bottom profile, it's still the same pattern. It's still got a ditch at one end, and then a sediment island underwater at the other. But you'll notice that the difference between the ditch and the shallow part is much greater. So if you continue along, the actual ditch can be anywhere. It can be upwards of 2 meters depending on where your groin is. I measured one that was close to the exit of the harbor, and there it's like the shallow part is 0.5 meter deep, and then the actual ditch part is beyond 2 meters, which is quite typical. It's bad for swimming because you suddenly drop into nothing, but I guess if you like jumping into rivers, that's good. Anyway, well, these post pillars, their original purpose is to dampen the waves from boat traffic. So if a Rhinox crawled past in the time that you've already been here, you'll notice that they generate quite a significant amount of waves. And these waves, they sort of upset the marine life. And by putting in a line of posts to dampen out the waves, you allow the aquatic life calmer water so they can flourish. Groin fields are sometimes called like aquatic deserts because they're normally just a big bed of sand with nothing there. And that, of course, erodes quite quickly because you need a good balance of water plants to keep your sediment compacted. So the solution for this was to build these post lines along the coast. It also has the added benefit of discouraging boats to come in because it creates like a small window, and you need quite a small boat to get in, which means anyone with a larger boat can't dock there, which also helps the aquatic life thrive a little bit. But you'll notice if you look in the water, you can see a high abundance of plants there. Okay, well that concludes everything I have to say about point 3. There is one more point on this excursion. It's a wee walk, but I would recommend it. It's a nice one. It's quite beautiful, but it's down to the Rhine Beach, which is further to the west. You'll see it marked on the excursion map. You can follow the path from the Bovis Polder all the way around if you just follow the river west, and you'll come to another set of groins that don't have any post lines. And also, it's still an inner, no, it's an outer bend here. So you can see the difference between groins on an inner bend of a river and groins on an outer bend, and how you'll notice these ones are actually quite a lot smaller in terms of depth between, or not depth, width between the actual river and where the coastline begins. And you can see how they trap sediment um, quite a lot better at this site. And you can also see how the absence of postlines affects the not only the water conditions. You'll see here there's not a lot of water plants because there's no calming effect. So the waves from the ships passing and the low water depth as well. The shallow water means that plants struggle here, which makes it good for swimming because you don't have as much muck, but not so good for erosion prevention because you need aquatic plants for that. Of course, you don't really need to put the pillars here because it's an outer bend of the river, or an inner bend, I should say, sorry. So on an inner bend, you don't have as much erosion because rivers naturally want to meander across the outer bend. So the groins and inner bends of the river can be quite a lot smaller and still have the intended effect. It's really good an exercise if you want to enlighten yourself a little bit on this. Is once you're home, or if you're already at home, is fire up Google Maps, go to this area and just have a look at the difference between the groins on the inner bends and outer bends around Wageningen. And you'll see that the bays on the outer bends of the river have a distinct, almost like a triangle shape with a sort of tongue sediment distribution. And then the ones on the inner bends are a lot more rectangular and they have a more gradual sediment load and then one deep ditch at one end, which is the end opposing to the flow direction. Anyway, I wanted to thank you for tuning into this podcast. I hope you learned something and enjoyed the excursion if you've done it. And yeah, thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of your day.